welcome to Age Better Podcast, where each week we take a deep dive into all the ways we can feel better, look better, live better, and, age better. I'm your host, Barbara Hannah Grufferman. Recently, Cosmopolitan magazine launched a special digital issue called Sex After 60. It's really, really good, which is dedicated to the underexplored, under-discussed, and under-celebrated sex experiences of highly experienced women. After I read it, I thought, hey, let's do a 2-part series on sex and the woman over 60, and immediately reached out to Cosmo to secure interviews with 2 of their writers. For sure, I urge you to click on the link in the show notes after you listen to today's episode so you can read the entire Cosmo special. Not only does this special issue report on real women's thoughts about sex, but it includes a groundbreaking survey from the Kinsey Institute that examines older women's fantasies, libido, and more. It was really well done, really worth your time. Today, I am chatting with Janet Siroto, a terrific journalist who actually interviewed me a few years ago and has served as Cosmo's executive editor. Janet wrote the featured article, which is called Where's Our Little Blue Pill? And next week, my guest will be Joan Price, who is a sex expert and has been writing about sex after 50, after 60, after 70, and so on and so forth for over 20 years. She wrote the very compelling story for the Cosmo issue about the best sex toys for postmenopausal women. Do not miss next week's episode. Do not. But let's get back to today's conversation. Janet's work delves into the heart of a subject many shy away from, the complexities and nuances of sex and the post-60 woman. Together, we unpack the layers of this conversation, touching on everything from the physical changes women experience during and after menopause to the emotional and psychological impacts these changes can have on our sex lives, and what some of the best treatments are to help women enjoy sex even more, whatever your age. I also really like the editor's introduction to the special issue, and I thought I would read it for you right now, right here, before I begin the chat with Janet. So here goes. It's undeniable. In the past year, through some alchemical combination of hollow stunts turned meaningful exposure and our collective yearning to hear from people with, actual experience, our culture has arrived at a rediscovery of sorts. Women over 60 are worth our time, our interest, our dollars, and our desire. What if this sudden public interest in older women could mean something more? What if it could go beyond a passing acceptance and become a long-term celebration of the fact that when it comes to physical intimacy, at least, women over 60 can and have been having adventurous, meaningful, satisfying sex. It's just that, too unnerved by the idea of menopause, another phenomenon now getting a rightful cultural rebranding, no one has bothered to really ask them about it or help them out along the way. Cosmo is a brand for young women, sure, but it's also a brand that recognizes young women stand to win most of all if all women are allowed and encouraged to thrive. So if you're a reader over 60, this issue is definitely for you. If you're a reader under 60, well, this issue is also for you. So thank you for letting me read that, everyone. I thought it was really well put. And really, I loved that special section very, very much, as I know you will too. You can get the link in the show notes after you listen to this episode. So let's get this conversation about sex and the woman over 60 started. Stay tuned. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Age Better Podcast. I'm your host, Barbara Hannah Grufferman. My guest today is Janet Siroto, who wrote an incredible article that is like one of the main features of a really super cool must-read special section that Cosmopolitan has put out just recently about sex after 60. And Janet's article, which we're going to talk about now, is called Where's Our Little Blue Pill? So we have a lot to discuss, Janet. Welcome to Age Better.
Thanks so much, Barbara. It's great to be here.
So, okay, you start your article off by talking about how, for the most part, this is a generalization, of course, but for the most part, we in our 60s, we had good sex in our 20s and 30s and also in our 40s. And then this is before menopause and all of that. And then all of a sudden we go, we're inching our way toward menopause and then beyond post-menopausal. But when we're younger, before that, we're thinking, hey, sex is pretty good, fairly easy now, not too complicated. I expect that to continue. But then, as you say in your article, and I quote, but as it turns out, some of us were wrong. So, Janet, what are, based on your research for the article and the interviews you had with real women, what are some of the realities of sex after 60?
Sure. Well, fortunately, some women just keep on keeping on and their sex life is just fine. Some say it even gets better. But many, many women do have symptoms that are challenging to manage. And research shows that up to 84% of women have such symptoms as vaginal dryness, burning, pain during intercourse. That's obviously a significant bundle of symptoms to deal with. And then between 1/3 and 50% say that they feel their sex drive declines or just disappears, that what used to be such a focal point of their life becomes, I could have sex, I could not have sex. It's not really a burning thing in my life anymore. I've lost that hunger.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of things going on with women in midlife that, when you're younger, you just don't realize. We are the sandwich generation, certainly as we're about to be menopausal. Kids might still be in school if you have kids. You might have aging parents and maybe dealing with that. I know that was certainly the case with me. I was exactly in that spot when I was going through menopause, kids in school, aging mother with health issues, aging mother-in-law with health issues. That could put a damper on sex. And then you have the physical changes that are taking place as women go through menopause. And the good news is, and there's a lot of good news here, that menopause, which is really at the root of a lot of the physical challenges that women have with sex at this age and beyond, is being discussed more now. And so I'm really, really happy about that. I mean, it's an embarrassing thing for a lot of women to talk about the fact that their vaginas might be dry and causing pain and burning and other discomforts. But okay, in your really great article, which there will be, as I say in my introduction, there will be a link to the entire issue, including your article in the show notes. I hope everyone takes the time to read it because it was well done. You talk a lot about Jenny. Jenny, she experienced significant decline in her sex drive after menopause. So again, based on your research when you were doing this, how common is that? How common is to kind of lose that drive and interest?
Unfortunately, it can be as high as 50%, according to research. What happens in menopause is that your estrogen production, as well as other hormones, really downshift. And that leads to many, many changes. The thinner, drier, less elastic vaginal tissue, which is all about, the painful intercourse. Also, that drop in sexual desire is a major change. The person I interviewed, Jenny, the one you just referred to, said that sex was a huge part of her life up until menopause.
Right.
She loved spending not just evenings, her whole weekend could revolve around sex. And so for this change all of a sudden to happen where it wasn't that hunger, that urge, that drive to have sex kind of like knocking on the door, she said it really negatively impacted her self-esteem. She didn't even know who she was anymore because she always imagined herself as Jenny, the sexy one.
Yeah, that's a pretty hard thing if you've been a sexual being your adult life to date, and then to find yourself like not really wanting it so much. And it's hard. But the good news is I always like to look for the good news in situations like this. And I really do think, as I mentioned before, the fact that we're talking more about menopause now quite openly. A lot of celebrities have gotten on board, which you do reference in your article. And, are they doing it because they themselves are going through it? Yes, many of them, that is true, like Stacey London and a few others. And that's really helpful. I think even if they are creating companies where they're reaping financial rewards,
yes,
I still think that, again, the more voices that are in this conversation, the louder it will be. And I think the more comfortable women will be in talking about it. But here's the good news too, is that there really are a lot of options for women now to help with the very common challenge of vaginal dryness. That's really good news. Whether someone goes the systemic route of hormone therapy or does something topical, which is what I have been doing since I turned 50 and went through menopause. Vaginal inserts as prescribed by my doctor. Again, 17 years later, and I'm still using this protocol with the approval of my doctor, of course. I personally did not take HT at the time. My doctor thought my hot flashes and the like, they just weren't severe enough to warrant it. But I have to tell you, with all the research that's come out since that time, I now regret it. I now have low bone density. We know that HT, which helps replenish your estrogen levels, helps with bone density, helps with your brain, your heart health. So I do have some regrets that I didn't look at it more seriously, but that's a topic for another conversation. Your article also references how severely underfinanced and under-researched women's health is across the board, not just their sexual health, but their health in general. And I shouldn't be saying our health. Do you see things improving here? Do you think that we are now starting to put more money and thought behind women's health research? What do you see?
Yes, I definitely think there is a change happening. Up until recently, only about 37% of medical studies focused on women. And women, as we know, make up at least half the population. So that is definitely shifting. Women are definitely becoming more vocal about representation, especially the younger generation as they move into those perimenopause and menopause years. These are women who are used to wrangling their fertility, going to their doctor, saying, get me pregnant. What can we do? Is it IUI, IVF? They're very knowledgeable, in control, and they're not afraid to ask about these options. In addition, you have more women entering as venture capitalists, funding concerns that are near and dear to their hearts. Still very low numbers, but the tide is definitely starting to turn. Among the women I interviewed, the feeling was, and these were experts in the field, the feeling was that what's happening is we're seeing a lot of money going towards women's health in a general way and access. So the ability to, say, have telehealth appointments with a menopause specialist, that's something which is really coming on strong. We may not have the little blue pill yet, but there will be this kind of expansion and trickle down into the realm of menopause. And I'm also thinking, Barbara, if you don't mind, the thing you said before about getting help from your doctor is a really big point, because what's happening as we age isn't just the matter of these sexual and reproductive changes. Other things start to happen. The women I spoke to said, oh, I began to develop high cholesterol or osteoporosis, and my sex life just didn't seem as important. Now we have all these voices saying, yes, it is important, and having a satisfying sex life has so many benefits for you physiologically, emotionally. So I think that is also shining a spotlight on the topic.
Absolutely. And as you reference in your article, and I've seen many studies also support that the more you have sex, whether it's with a partner or it's alone through masturbation, if you don't use it, you can lose it. And so it is a very important part of your not only life and enjoyment and pleasure, but also your vaginal health. Because we also know that vaginal dryness, whether you're having sex or not, if not treated, can only get progressively worse. It's not something that goes away on its own. So this is all part of your vaginal health, everybody. But as it turns out, by having sex, some kind of sex, that whatever's pleasurable to you personally will help to keep your vaginal health kind of where you want it to be. So there's a lot of reasons to kind of take your sexual health, your vaginal health quite seriously and think of the ways that you can really address it. And again, I mentioned self-pleasure. It doesn't have to be with another person, or maybe you're at that stage in your life where you don't have a significant other in your life, or you're not even dating anyone. That doesn't mean you shouldn't consider having some kind of sex. And by the way, I just want to remind everyone, I said it also in my introduction, that this is a 2-part series about sex after 60. And next week, my guest is going to be Joan Price, who also wrote an article, right, Janet, for this special section. In this case, Joan, who has for decades has been writing and talking about sex toys. She wrote specifically about sex toys after 60, and that's what our discussion is going to be about next week. And I really can't wait. You do not want to miss this one, everybody. But yeah, so sexual health, vaginal health, it's just so important. And it's also important if you do have a significant other. And I'm sure that people you spoke with and even the experts discussed this and supported this. It's good for your relationship if you have some kind of intimacy. And I also noted, Janet, quite a few women in your article that you referenced, or some of them, I shouldn't say all of them, were talking about non-penetrative sex, meaning it wasn't intercourse. It just was intimate and they had sex, but it wasn't penetrative sex. So it doesn't have to be. I mean, that's not the be all and end all of sex, right, Janet? What did you find out about that?
Definitely. Well, as I was working on this article for Cosmopolitan, one of the things that was really surprising to me was that some women had vaginal dryness to such an extent that it was really uncomfortable for them to, say, wear pants or shorts, that they would have spotting after riding a bicycle. It can really interfere with everyday life. So this idea, keeping that tissue elastic, lubricated, comfortable, is really important, even if you've sworn off penetrative sex for the rest of your life. Right. So I think that's something worth noting. What happens with estrogen dwindling is the tissues become thinner, the vagina itself can become narrower and shorter. So those are real physiological changes. And there are plenty of things you can do about it, as you've spoken about. There are options, topical estrogen-based creams that your doctor can prescribe. Some women swear by coconut oil. There are vaginal dilators, which are these They basically look like a dildo, and you insert them in first very narrow sizes and then getting slightly bigger to gently stretch the tissue. There's pelvic floor therapy, which can help. So there are all kinds of things that women can do to find what works best for them to keep that whole area comfortable, even if sex isn't part of the equation.
Right. And healthy. And you did mention in your article that, and I wanted to touch on this, we said a little bit earlier that there are more and more celebrities or well-known people who are kind of entering that menopause space. And again, I feel like it's, and I'm sure you'd agree, lifting the conversation of making it louder is a very positive thing for all women. But a lot of them have come out with non-estrogen products specific to menopause and sex and specific to the vagina. I mean, that because that really is like 75%, or I think you said some other statistic, a very high percentage of women do experience vaginal dryness. It seems to be the number one reason for uncomfortable sex and vaginal health problems, as we referenced, right? UTIs and just kind of progressive sexual vaginal health challenges. But here's the thing with these companies. So sure, a lot of them are capitalizing on this newfound interest in menopause and women's desire to help their bodies and maybe not go down the estrogen route. But what are your thoughts on this? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Or is this an opportunistic thing? Give us your opinion.
I think it's a good thing. I think, of course, there are going to be people saying, hey, this area is exploding in terms of possible revenue. Let's chime in. But I think that's very important because each woman's body is so unique that what might work for you might not work for me, might not work for your sister. So more products, I believe, is better, and more conversation about it. I read one study that said something like 75% of women wait a full year before acting on the symptoms they're experiencing. So There's a lot going on there. There's shame. There's a lack of basic information and education. Women are not prepared for these changes in the way they heard all about what it's going to be like when you get your period, and you can use tampons or pads, and there's this stuff called Midol. It's not like that. It's really shrouded in mystery what happens during menopause. One thing that I read is that the main indicator of when you would go through menopause is what age your mother went through menopause. And most women don't know that because we don't talk about menopause. So I'm all for more products, more conversation, more education, more access. I definitely think it's a positive thing.
Yeah, I know you agree with that. And you made that clear in your article as well. And I think probably a very important message to share with the listeners is that they should really have a partnership with a trusted healthcare provider. And if you don't really like your healthcare provider, if your healthcare provider is saying, oh, just live with it, as many of them do in this day and age, which is heartbreaking beyond belief, then you find yourself another one. And I just want to propose that if you are looking for one who can help you kind of navigate this period of your life, you should consider going to what was called the North American Menopause Society, is now the Menopause Society. Just go on to www.menopause.org, their website, and they have a section of find a healthcare provider in your area. So that's number one. And number two, as Dr. Margaret Noctegal, who is a frequent visitor on this show, and I often say, is that no woman should ever have to suffer. Not in this day and age. We just talked about all these new companies that have come out with options. I mean, coconut oil, I'm a believer in it. I also use coconut oil. I mean, it's so simple and it's okay for you. In fact, it helps you. It helps your body. There are a lot of options, including estrogen options. So lots and lots and lots of options. And I want to get to that also. You also, in your article, talk about laser therapy.
Yes.
And hormone supplements and testosterone therapy, the pellets and all that. Just kind of give us a little insight there. What did you find out?
Sure. I found out, as we said before, it's really individual what will work for one woman versus another. So there are all kinds of new treatments coming up that may not be fully approved yet, but are definitely feeling as if they're very promising. There is the use of a laser. It's usually known as the Mona Lisa laser. And that is used, yes, actually, on a woman's vagina. And the benefits can include helping with elasticity and lubrication. It also helps some women who are having that kind of incontinence where they pee a little bit when they sneeze or laugh or cough.
Very common issue after menopause.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. So it's definitely looking very promising in that area. The thing that you want to do is go to a very experienced, skilled medical doctor. This is not something to turn up at a med spa and say, hey, go ahead and use a laser on this most delicate area of your body.
Yeah, please, everyone, don't do that. Don't go to a med spa.
Exactly.
For that. I'm not saying don't go to a med spa.
Right.
Do not go to a med spa for that, in my opinion, and yours too, Janet.
Yes, definitely. So that's one thing to consider. I was also really intrigued as I was reporting on this for Cosmopolitan about the use of testosterone. I had never heard of this before, but there's a new kind of therapy where a tiny dissolvable pellet with some testosterone and some estrogen is inserted under the skin. They usually do this sort of in back below the bikini line, right above your butt. And it sits there for several months dissolving and sort of slow drip of a tiny amount of testosterone and estrogen. One woman I spoke to said her pellet was put in at 3 p.m, and by 8 p.m. that night, it was as if a switch had been flicked on. She said it was absolutely life-changing in terms of her energy level, in terms of being more open and eager to have sex. Her libido had really declined. I also spoke to a couple of women who said that they had noticed that during sex, their orgasms had become what they described as muted, less strong and intense and satisfying, and that using testosterone brought that back, took them back to the experience they used to have. Now, testosterone, although again, there are some promising studies, it's not fully approved for use in this way because there is the possibility of perhaps some cardiological side effects and others that are undergoing more research and review before this becomes something that could potentially become a standard treatment.
Got it. Thank you for that overview. And again, I think that's a discussion to have with your trusted healthcare provider, whatever options. But as you can see, Janet, I'm sure you'll agree, there are many options here. And the fact that anybody should suffer, unless it's just such a severe case of vaginal dryness, but really the vast majority of women, I think, can be helped considerably by even a combination of these options. But again, I also want to go back to some other factors, and it's not just the physical, because right now we're talking about the physical, but also the psychological and what's happening in your life, the sandwich generation we talked about, but also I wrote an article a few years ago about how sometimes it isn't you, it isn't the woman. It can also be your partner who's experiencing either physical issues. I mean, we're all getting older, assuming your partner is around your age and not a younger one. And we're all starting to experience these more common physical challenges and health issues. And maybe even there are medications involved. So it's just such a combo plan, as I call it. I have to say, one of the best books I ever read on this kind of topic, and it was less about the physical, was by Esther Perel, the sex expert or family therapist, as she calls herself.
She's great.
Called Mating in Captivity. And I had the great honor and pleasure of interviewing her for my very first book, which came out in 2010. So, it goes a while back. And now she is just the hottest thing around. She's everywhere. She has a great podcast and she's just heavily quoted. In fact, she was quoted in this section. I believe you referenced her too in your article, if I'm not mistaken. But she talks about the process of getting there. Now, here's the thing, everyone. Back in our 20s, maybe getting there was like there. We were like, yeah, let's go have sex. I'm ready now, right? Or you planned it, but you didn't realize you were planning it. They're like, oh, I'm seeing Joe on Saturday night. And you start thinking about what you're going to wear and what you're going to talk about and blah. That's kind of pre-gaming it a bit. Wouldn't you say, everyone? Yes. So as we got older, we need to kind of maybe plan things a little bit more. And some people go, oh no, I want it to be the way it used to be. But in reality, we always kind of planned it. Now you just have to really kind of think about planning it. Like put a night aside, have a sex date. And you know what? Quite frankly, and again, we'll talk more about this next week with Joan Price, but having that kind of physical help with a little either masturbation, using a sex toy to kind of really get your juices flowing can be very, very helpful in terms of building the desire. And that's what this is all about. And you know what, Esther, I cannot recommend this book enough. I recommend it all the time, Mating in Captivity, and there will be a link. What are your thoughts on that? I know you're very familiar with Esther Perel.
Yes. Well, I wanted to jump in and add that one of the most provocative quotes that I collected when I was working on this article for Cosmopolitan was from one of the doctors who said that her younger self would probably hate her for saying it. But even if a woman is not totally in the mood, even if she has some emails she needs to send, even if the dishes are sitting in the kitchen sink, sometimes it's in actually your own best interest to just go with the flow if you have a partner who's interested and ready to roll, because the more you have sex, the more you get in that groove and begin to get in the habit of it. Once you get going, odds are you are going to enjoy it and have a fantastic time. And if you had a great and satisfying sex life before menopause came along, you have every reason to enjoy that after menopause. And part of it is just sort of setting that wheel in motion, which I thought was really interesting and may make some of us, our feminist selves, cringe a little. But I thought it was a really interesting quote that I wanted to share.
It was a great quote, and thank you for bringing that up. It was a terrific quote and so true. And I can personally attest to this. We're not always in the mood. No, I mean, that's what we're talking about today. We're not. Sometimes we have to kind of make ourselves be in the mood. And there are different ways to get there. That's one of them. Maybe using a sex toy is another. But just starting, you get to that starting point, and chances are, as you just pointed out, Janet, you'll be very happy that you did. I mean, every time that I've felt the need to kind of take that route, I always was, wow, am I so happy I did that? Am I so happy I decided to go there? Yes. Right?
Definitely. To jump in with one other thought, there is this whole chicken and the egg thing that if you begin to experience these symptoms with menopause where, hey, what's going on down there? Why are things so dry? Why is intercourse not comfortable the way it used to be? That is going to make you reluctant to have sex. It doesn't feel good. Maybe it even hurts. Maybe it hurts a lot. So speaking up and getting help is such an important thing. And as you've already mentioned, Barbara, just using a topical estrogen-based cream or coconut oil, these things are so simple and can have such a profound effect for so many women that it's a lot easier to be in the mood when everything is so much more comfortable.
Absolutely. What are some of the, were there any new things you found out while researching and writing and talking with people about this, or any myths that you felt were busted? Anything you want to share?
Well, there's some interesting techniques out there that are just beginning to bubble up that are using heat, not heat like burning, but heat like a hot stone massage, that some urologists and OBGYNs are starting to use for these kinds of issues. It's like a form of warm radiation that can help women who are dealing with some of these issues. There are vibrators, there are different kinds of over-the-counter products you can get. You can go to Target and find great products by Woman-S and some other brands that can help you with these issues. So it's really about being open to experimentation, and I think talking with people, not just your healthcare provider, but your friends. You'll be so surprised what you'll learn from a friend who perhaps is a year or two older than you, or went through menopause a year or two before you. It's such an important thing to tap our network.
Yeah. Do you find that when you were talking to women for this, did you find that a lot of them really felt a little, even though they may have had some challenges with sex after 60, but did they find they a little more free, like a little more confident? Or how did that come into play in your discussions?
I definitely think that they felt that it was their right to find help for these issues. And there was one great quote from a doctor I interviewed for Cosmopolitan who said when she's in our age group, when she began her practice, she would really have to draw her patients out. And how is your sex life? And how is your sexual frequency? And are you having any issues that you would want to discuss? She said, today, women walk in who are going through menopause and say, hey, my vagina is dry. What are you going to do to fix it? So I do think women are confident in asking for help and taking control of the situation, which is a wonderful, positive thing. There's obviously a lot of room to grow here, and there's a lot of work to be done. So many women are still not seeking help. So many women are being dismissed by their doctors. But the conversation, the education, and the products are definitely beginning to flow through the pipeline.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to mention too, you mentioned heat and warmth and all that. There is a product, I'm not going to mention actual brand name because I actually can't remember it off the top of my head, but it's like a lubricant, but it actually creates a warm feeling in your vagina area. And I mean, it's really amazing, and it really adds to the whole sexual experience. I just wanted to throw that out there. So people should really look for that. I will look at because I have it. I will look at it and I'll put a link to it in the show notes as well, if anyone's interested.
KY may make products like that.
Yes, KY absolutely does. KY is a trusted brand for so many years. And definitely people should check out KY Jelly as well. And all the, their whole product line for sure.
But the one thing to say about that, because I know a couple of the women I interviewed said KY was not doing it. Sometimes you actually need to change those tissues, that no amount of superficial lubrication is going to resolve the problem. But if you get something with a little bit of estrogen, depending on what your doctor recommends, that can actually change the tissues so that everything becomes so much more comfortable.
I agree completely. As I mentioned much earlier in our conversation, and I started at 50 when I was postmenopausal, taking the estrogen, like little tablets that are inserted through my doctor. And I still do because they continue to work for me. But it's a combination plan because I also then use a lubricant when I am having sex with my husband, including coconut oil. So there's a battery of stuff. You have to play around and see what works for you, what works for your best friend, or Jenny, who was quoted in your article, Janet, may not work for you. And also I have to point out too, something I like to say almost about everything in life. I think as you go on in years, you have to reassess and tweak. Like I started adding in lubricants, not at 50, quite frankly, but only a few years later because I needed them more. So you just have to reassess. What works at 50 may not work at 60, it may not work at 70, and so on and so forth. So reassess and then tweak. Big believer in that for everything in life. You know, what you eat, how you exercise, how you have sex, all super, super duper important. So, Janet, this was a great conversation. I love that section so much. I'm going to share it with all of my friends. Of course, as I said, the link will be in the show notes, as will, of course, your article. So, so good. But we covered a lot. Could you just give us, in your opinion, what are the 3 key takeaways you really want to make sure the Age Better audience remembers from our conversation today?
Well, thank you so much, Barbara. It's been terrific to be here. I would say 3 key takeaways. First of all, talk about it. If you're having symptoms, discomfort, other issues changing with your sex life, talk to your MD, talk to your partner, talk to your friends. And if you talk to your doctor and they're like, oh, this isn't so bad, doesn't look so serious to me, and you're uncomfortable, find another doctor, as we've mentioned. Second, I would say don't be afraid of estrogen necessarily. It got a really bad reputation, but the doctors I spoke to said topical estrogen can make a huge difference and it can be safely prescribed even for women with concerns like breast cancer. So do talk to your doctor and learn all about that. And then third, just to echo what you just said, Barbara, be willing to experiment. Each woman will have a different situation. What works for one woman, like coconut oil, might not work for another. Dilators might be great for one. Pelvic floor exercises for another. Someone else might want to go get laser treatment or testosterone. So I would say don't give up and learn about the options and try them till you find something that works for you.
Thank you so much, Janet. This was really, really fun. And remember, everyone, next week, Joan Price, sex expert, and I guess she is really considered like a sex toy expert. We'll be on to talk about what are the best sex toys for women over 60, post-menopausal women. So I'm really looking forward to that conversation, and I think you will be too. See you then. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode of Age Better Podcast, please do a few things. First, share it with all your friends and family. Then, subscribe to Age Better wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, so you never miss a single episode. Finally, if you have ideas for topics you want me to cover in a future episode of Age Better, send an email to agebetterpodcast@gmail.com. or reach out to me on social media. Until next time, remember this: we can't control getting older, but we can control how we do it. Talk to you soon. Age Better Podcast is a proud member of the Sound Advice Network. Sound Advice, women's voices amplified.